All right, all right, all right, all right. Thank you for joining in. Hopefully you can see my screen. Let me know if you can see the screen. Oh, wait a minute. We got some feedback here. Oh boy, I forgot. I forgot to put it on mute. Okay. All right, we put it on mute. We should be good. Let's try this one more again. I gotta find a better way to do this, y'all. Oh boy. Okay, here we are once again. I know it's late, y'all, but I know if I don't do it right now, then I probably am gonna be behind on it. And so I just came off of a panel on Debate Talk for You. Shout out to Debate Talk for You and all those who are involved in the panel, having a discussion about abuse in the community and, you know, feedback on the R. Kelly, Surviving R. Kelly documentary. Y'all gonna have to bear with me because I'm having nighttime voice. Clear my throat here. Let me clear my throat. All right, for those who have joined us back, hopefully you would have seen the first, because I'm going to be building on, and no, I'm not building a case per se, but I'm seeking to understand and sharing the information that I have gleaned. And so this is the second. It's going to be supporting some of the observances, you know, I'm very careful to say, that I observed in the first in the first program. So since the last time you've seen me, I've been listening to a lot of what they call I've been listening to a lot of the testimonies. So actually the sister's name is Toxic Diamond on YouTube. And I had, for ease of research, I just went ahead and listened to a lot of the readings that she did on the books. Currently, she's on Demetrius Smith, who was R. Kelly's personal assistant for 10 years from, he says, 85 to 95. So he met him at 16. And so currently that's where I am in the research. But I'm using a lot of, right now, this would have been before he would have met him. And so right now I'm using a lot of R. Kelly's own book material, as well as Soulonomics investigation, to take a look at some of the issues that many people, and I was listening to an interview by Demetrius Smith today, and he was saying that whatever you call the illness or the psychological, because the question was, you know, should he get jail time or does he need therapy and psychological help? And many people, not just him, are like, whatever you call his issue. So I keep hearing this uncertainty about what's the problem, you know, and the willingness of Robert to make himself vulnerable in the space for someone to be able to assess him to find out what the problem is, you know. And so people who know him and people who don't know him are still trying to figure out what in the world is wrong with him so that you know how to heal and treat him. Many people are talking about healing. And again, we know you can't heal or fix something that you don't know the cause of and the root cause of. And so that, because I know that, because of the work that I've done in my own life, and information that I've shared continually in the community, I know that we're looking at symptoms, we're looking at outliers, we're looking at the result of a behavior based on a root issue, that if we don't find out what that problem is, then all we're going to be doing is chasing the symptoms of the issue and masking the symptoms of the issue. So with that said, without further ado, I'm going to get this party started, right? So again, this is Young Kelly on the right, or on the left if it's on your screen, and this is the older Kelly in the interview. Once again, medical disclaimer. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health providers with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. So, no, I am not an MD. I am just very observant, and I look at the soul issues. I look at the spirituality of a matter to try to understand what it is that I'm looking at in conjunction with research, in conjunction with medical journals, in conjunction with history. And this is how I'm able to come to certain conclusions that the popular consensus usually doesn't go in that direction. Like I said in the last video, for whatever the reason is, not sure. So let's rewind. This is Unraveling R. Kelly taking a step back. Let's rewind. And I led with this quote the last time, and I'm just going to keep this quote here. They still don't know what caused my problem. This was from his book, Solar Coaster. And this is in a chapter where he was talking about when some thought it was dyslexia and they were uncertain if they knew what his problem was. And this is also something that has been nagging him. You hear him talk about it in his book a lot, as well as in, whether it be in his music or whether it be in interviews, when he did do interviews, the experience that he had with the way in which people teased him. We're going to explore that next time. I'm not going to explore that this time. But again, his problem, quote unquote, that started with what was some are saying our illiteracy, his inability to read and comprehend. That is something that plagued his consciousness. So that's something that we need to think about as we're talking about the young Robert. So based on the research, you saw this picture before, there's a likely possibility, I say likely possibility, that Robert Kelly's explicit behavior, his hidden disability, his brain damage, and if you tuned in last time, you'll know what it could be a result of. So Robert Sylvester Kelly was born January 8th, 1967. He was 6 years old when the term fetal alcohol syndrome was coined by Kenneth L. Jones and David W. Smith, two pediatric dysmorphologists who rediscovered the telltale signs of alcohol exposure in infants at birth and notable in early childhood. I would adjure you or advise you to look this up because there was something that was happening in times past in history where people didn't think that there was an issue with having a drink or two. And then you had a whole epidemic of fetal alcohol syndrome babies that that were misdiagnosed or undiagnosed. And so these two, Kenneth and David, when you read a little bit about the stories, they were able to, in the 70s, they were able to, like they said, rediscover these telltale signs because, history is a cycle. There was 1 minute you'll hear it's good, there's another minute you'll hear it's bad. I'll give you an example just to stay on track. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, when you're talking about Coca-Cola, it actually had cocaine in it. And it was actually something that was used in the medical industry. And and it was also something that was subscribed or prescribed for children, if you can believe that. Coca-Cola having real cocaine in it. And it was prescribed sometimes as cough medicine, if I'm not mistaken, if my memory serves me correctly. So because I like weird alternative facts, hopefully my memory is serving me correctly because it's past my bedtime, right? And so what happened was there became a large addiction to Coca-Cola that had Coke in it in the early 1900s. Okay, you can look that up. There's a documentary called, I think it's The History of Drugs in America or something to that effect. There's also the history of heroin. I'm talking about, why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing this up because at different times in history, the culture changes and things become norm. And it's not till after these things have been normalized do people realize that those things that you thought were harmless were actually harmful. Okay, we're living in a time where vaccines at one point were thought to be harmless, but then now we're coming into a space and time where people are saying no. One generation passed and no, this is actually harmful. Okay, so when R. Kelly was born, it was what they say about 1974, I believe. So it was some 6 years later that these two men were gone on record by saying no, rediscovering the signs of alcohol exposure in infants. So that's something to talk about for another day. And if you're a researcher out there, you can definitely, look that up. So if by chance he was exposed to alcohol in the womb, the next chapter of his roller coaster life would be sure to exasperate his possible pre-existing birth conditions. So last time we discovered the possibility of a statement that he made of one specialist saying that he was brain damaged, and based on the social conditions that surrounded him and his birth, which we're going to go into now, I was able to conclude, like I said, it dropped in my spirit, that it's fetal alcohol syndrome. And when I say it was clear, it was clear. It was just like really crystal clear after doing, a number of research, a lot of research, and just like, what could it possibly be? I promise you. And once it dropped in my spirit, I just jumped on the computer and just started searching it out. And lo and behold, I'm here sharing it with you. So I'm going to go forward. Again, this is a little review for those who may be catching this video instead of the initial video. Fetal alcohol syndrome disorder is an umbrella term describing the range of effects that can occur in an individual who's exposed to alcohol during the 9-month prenatal period before birth. So again, I'm not saying, oh, his mother knew and she was drinking. It could be any time. There's women who can go up to the third trimester and don't know, not third trimester, their 3rd month in the first trimester and not realize that they're pregnant, right? So there are all kinds of conditions that could have surrounded her possibly drinking while he was in vitro. But I'm going to continue. Alcohol-related neurodevelopment disorder. So this is under the umbrella. People with ARND might have intellectual disabilities and problems with behavior and learning. They might do poorly in school, which he's on record of doing poorly, and have difficulties with math, memory, attention, judgment, and poor impulse control. All of these, as we said the last time, he fits the criteria. 1 in 100 babies have FASD, nearly the same rate as autism. FASD is more prevalent than Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, SIDS, cystic fibrosis, and spina bifida combined. Alcohol use during pregnancy is the leading preventable cause of birth defects, developmental disabilities, and learning disabilities. Now, based on his testimony in his book, of course, his mother's favorite drink was beer. So when you look at the alcohol content, and I believe it was at 4 or 5% alcohol content as opposed to hard liquor, he may have lesser, there's a spectrum of FASD, from where it's higher on the spectrum to lower on the spectrum. So again, like I said, based on his functionability, someone will have to assess him who is familiar in these areas and be able to say for sure this is what it is. But this is just a clue to possibly where to look. Alcohol causes more harm than heroin or cocaine during pregnancy. The Institute of Medicine says of all the substance of abuse, including cocaine, heroin, and marijuana, alcohol produces by far the most serious neurobehavioral effects in the fetus. And we are looking at neurobehavioral effects. We're looking at high levels of addiction. We're looking at sex addictions. Some would say addictions to drinking and certain things that we're seeing in the individual that actually are pronounced, because humans, depending, are susceptible to addiction, depending on your personality type, depending on your, genetics. You may be more addicted than others or susceptible to addiction than others. But in this case, it kind of magnifies it, right? But I'm going to continue. Again, we saw this picture before. I'm not doing this for shock value. I'm just really doing it, again, to seek an understanding and share another perspective, possibly, so that we can, again, collectively have a possible, more well-rounded discussion on the matter. So again, he was born January 8th, 1967. After listening to a number of testimonies from different people who said they've known him personally, these are some of the things that have come up about the individual. He's stubborn, headstrong, career-driven, hence the catalog of his music, holds grudges, disciplined in the area of work. So with the career-driven, he can be controlling. This is what a lot of the women said on the Surviving R. Kelly documentary, as well as men as well. Shy, there's a lot of testimony that the early Robert, which is who we're looking at, was a very shy person. His brother said on one report that he was so shy that he would, when he was singing, because they encouraged him to sing, he would turn his back so he wouldn't have to look at the audience. And his teacher, according to him, Miss McLean from his high school, who also promoted or encouraged him to pursue music, because he didn't really want to pursue music in the beginning. She gave him the idea to put on the glasses that you see him wear often to cover his eyes and not necessarily look at the audience, so he wouldn't be so shy. Okay, so he's very shy and introverted individual early on, and private. There are many people that testify to him being a very private individual as well. So I took the liberty of looking up his name because, again, like I said, when I deal with Soulonomics and understanding the soul and how it interfaces in our reality and all things concerning trauma and healing, that's kind of my area of where I have been for a number of years. I know that words have power, and our names also have power, because our name is almost the single most thing that we will be called. Um, and it reverberates within us because we are called it so much repeatedly from the time that we are born. Before we can even respond to this call and response action, we are being called this name. So somebody other than us, our parents or our grandparents or whomever we're being named after, has a great deal of responsibility in their hands to be able to put on this child. And a lot of times I think in the melanated community and in general, people who have been disconnected from their culture has lost an understanding of the importance of names. And we name people things because it's cute, or we name people things because it has emotional value, but we don't understand that we put this vibration on the individual until or if and when they choose to change their name. But a lot of times the name maps out for us a path that we would walk into if the right elements are there. So his name, Robert, um, means bright fame. Okay, so when I saw this at first, I'm like, interesting, tell me more. Bright fame, that's what his first name means. Sylvester means wooded or wild. That's his middle name. And Kelly means warrior or defender. So if his name was a sentence or his name was something descriptive, it would mean bright fame, a wooded or wild defender warrior. Okay, so when people says he's stubborn and he's not backing down, he's not retreating, he's still moving forward, even if he's being famous for something that is not correct, he's not going to back down. He's going to stay in what he initially became famous for, which is his career, and he's going to push forward. So you see him earlier this year celebrating his birthday in the club, and people are like, well, he acts like nothing is bothering him. There's a certain energy in addition to what happens to us, because the name is not a totality, but it does contribute, right? And so I'm not saying his name is totality, but in his case, we can definitely see how his name is manifesting in his walk, okay? And this is why you see in spaces like Malcolm X, where he comes to consciousness and awareness, that he changes the name of which either he chooses or somebody who's conscious chooses. We see in biblical texts that Abram's name is changed to Abraham and Sarai's name is changed to Sarah, right? We see this name change happen because if you are named, again, like I said, something that is not in alignment with your destiny or not in alignment with the walk that you're trying to go, then it behooves you to change that name, okay? But in this case, fame is in his name. Wild and warrior and a defender is also in his name. So this is something his mother said to him in the book. One day, you're going to be famous. So remember, let me go back. Robert, whether she knew it or not, means bright fame, okay? And his mother, Joanne Kelly, is saying to him while they're at McDonald's, of which he shares in the story, one day you're going to be famous, she would say with a smile. But I didn't really know what famous meant. I mean, famous like Al Green. So his mother was a musician. She would sing at church as well as in the club. She was a part of a band named the Six Pack when he was younger. He remembers a 5-year-old memory of going to the club with his mother and seeing her perform. And so she wasn't famous for her talent. He speaks about his mother's family also being musicians. So music is in the family. And if I neglected to mention this in the first episode or part of this discussion, music is definitely in his family. So the possibility of having fetal alcohol syndrome and possibility, and we're going to go back over the different elements of this disorder, um, but music was in the family, so it only magnified if indeed he was exposed, and if indeed this is the root cause of his quote brain damage end quote, then it would make sense why the mother is feeding to him that you're going to be the famous one. You have a voice, she has a talent. And sometimes parents, if they're not able to manifest their desire and they see a potential within their children, then they put that on the child to say, you're going to be what I wasn't. And I find this interesting because throughout the narrative, he, in the beginning, he didn't want to be a singer. And he was coached to go in this direction. He didn't want to be a musician. He said it several times. He actually just wanted to play basketball. And his mother and his high school teacher was the ones that told him, you're going to be famous and you have a calling on your life and you have to go in this direction, which is something that we have to explore another time. So again, I went into names. Names are more than a bunch of letters grouped together. They're more than a convenience allowing us to talk to each other. Names can be a gift or a curse, depending on what you're named. Names have power. They define things and they define us. Okay. And this is a biblical precept, which is Proverbs 22:1. A good name, which is at this time, his name is sullied. He doesn't have a good name, but his name still means famous. So being that he is famous, he's still being famous, but for something else, right? A good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold. So he's lost that in the eyesight of the people, but once again, he's still famous for something else. If you don't believe me, just search R. Kelly on YouTube. Okay. Since the day of my birth, he says, and again, I feel like my soul has been on some kind of roller coaster. Sometimes I ask myself, when will this ride stop? Or when will it ever end? Oh, sorry, or will it ever stop? At this point, his mother has passed away, and only people who were possibly around at that stage before he was born could really tell, what was happening with his mother. But if he's saying since the day of his birth, he felt like his soul had been on some kind of roller coaster, then the environment around his birth is telling. And the only clues that we have is his mother's reaction to his father. So there's something that was going on. I don't think he knows who his father is. I don't think he said that he knew who his father is. But there's something that's going on that's covering this soul that is about to enter into the earth. And once he enters, there is something that is, like I said, surrounding him, whether it be for good or for bad. And he's feeling it, but unable to identify what it is. So this right here that you're about to look at right here is something, again, as I'm reading, because you read and you listen and then you chill. Because if you try to force it, for me personally, it doesn't connect. So I don't try to force it to connect. I kind of just collect the data and just, chillax on it. So for those who have seen that the last week, I've been taking my mind off the matter and reading Island Love, which is a book that I authored. It's a fiction narrative. It's pretty cool. If you missed it, it's on the channel. And I just, step back from the situation. It's like if you're painting and you're stuck, or if you're writing a song and you're stuck, or you whatever you're doing, and you step back and you let it breathe, and then you come back and approach it. So this is something that I was listening once again to another interview, and then it hit me, and I went and did the research, and I was able to put some pieces together. Third child of 4 has 3 brothers. So this is just my stats on him, and it's kind of raw, so bear with me. So he's the third child of 4 children, right? He has 3 brothers and 1 older sister. This is the older sister that Kerry is on record by saying she's the perpetrator in his molestation case. One of them, anyway. Father left the children, so the mother was essentially a single mother. His life exhibits the effects of growing up in the church and poverty. So he's going between the church, poverty, fatherlessness, right? So I'm going to do a quote from him. My mother was my daddy, which I found very interesting because the very first thing that a lot of the women on the documentary said that he would say is call him daddy. Okay. So my mother was my daddy too, so to speak, because she raised me on her own. Her husband, Lucius, became my stepfather, but no disrespect to him, he was not my real father. So he rejects Lucius as a surrogate father, okay, but names his mother as the daddy as well. As a kid, when I first understood that my father left my mother when she was pregnant with me, so while he's in vitro, the mother is alone. Okay, so all of those feelings for mothers out there who don't realize that when you're in pregnancy, and fathers out there who don't realize when the mother is in pregnancy, all of what she's experiencing, all of those emotions that, again, as I said before, it creates this elixir, this chemical cocktail of hormones that are released in the bloodstream. The child experiences it. So if you have mothers out there who have experienced extreme fear while the child was in the womb, you will feel the child tense up in your womb, right? If you're relaxed, sometimes you will see the child relaxed and playful, or the baby as it's in vitro. And so what are the feelings that the mother was experiencing when the father left her as soon as he found out she was pregnant? And the belly who would eventually be born Robert, was he feeling that too? And the answer would be yes. I wasn't really upset about it, but it hurt. Thankfully, I had someone who was a genius at being a mother and father too. And so he takes the onus off of the father to a certain degree. And because the mother is in this superhero role in his mind's eye, and she's able to work through all things, even though a mother can never be a father. And I know some people may be upset with that, but a father can be a father in the same way a father can never be a mother, right? But in his estimation, he says she was a genius at being mother and father. Though I'd never met or seen my father, on special occasions, and I read this before, like Christmas and birthdays, my siblings' father would come by and take them shopping for toys and clothes. I never got jealous, but I do remember being sad and curious. In fact, one day when I was about 11 or 12, I decided to ask my mom questions about my father, like, and we're going to go on. And we read this before, but I'll read it again. Who is he? Where is he? Why doesn't he come to take me out for my birthday or bring me anything for Christmas? My mother would just roll her eyes and look away from me and say, don't say nothing to me about that no good son of a bee, because the minute he found out I was pregnant with you, this coward blink left. Disappeared in the wind, she'd say. Didn't want to have nothing to do with either you or me. So again, understandable. She's angry. She's upset. Give me 1 minute. I'll be right back. So if we're looking emotionally, last week I discovered the possible brain trauma. Now we're looking at the emotional trauma of the individual while he possibly was exposed to alcohol in the room, right? There's a possibility based on the information he left. So not only are you chemically affected by the alcohol, there's a possibility the emotional cocktail that was she experienced while you were in vitro, you internalized that as well, all before you were born, because she's saying before he was born, his coward blink left. So the projection of the indifference and resentment towards the father, the young man or the young child is also internalizing all of these things, but we're going to continue. He says concerning that incident, I remember my mother's eye on one of those days, close to blood red as the anger grew while she talked about my father as if he was the devil himself. Okay, so the mother, again, he was remembering these traumatic experiences, and he's caught between a rock and a hard place because the mother, in his estimation, was mother and father to him. So he owes her his loyalty, but at the same time, he's telling you his places of injury. So the mother is angry just thinking about the father. So I remember my eyes getting baby blood red too, because what my mother loved, I loved. And what she hated, I hated. It was that day, that moment, that I decided to hate my father, not knowing really what hate meant or having a clear understanding above love. She told me on that day to never mention him again. Okay. Again, he's following his mother's lead. His mother hates his father. He said he hated his father. And then his mother told him never to talk about it again. And so she locked those feelings inside of him. Those feelings became crystallized. And this is why Soulonomics, for me, or looking at the core issue, is important, because he's telling you what happened. These feelings of hatred, these feelings of indifference, and this quiet, reserved, shy, bashful youth, they were stirring. So they were poisoning him slowly as he, showed to the world, I'm harmless. So there's something raging inside while outside, as this is why he names it Solar Coaster. He's kind of keeping his cool. He witnesses his mother anger and resentment towards his father, and I basically said what I was thinking there, and he tucked it away in the back of his mind. And it says his voice, this reemerged years later, and is a reoccurring term in the testimonies of his victims. One of his first requests is for them to call him daddy. So I found that interesting, that the mother was mother and father, and that he never allowed, he locked away this thought of a father or a dad in a brick box, as he put it, in his mind. And when he regained power, or when he finally got to a place of power through his music and having money and being in charge of people, when it came to women, he made them call him daddy. And he wanted to, as they put it, raise him, which is, again, very telling. His mother went on to say, I'm your mother and your father, she said. I promised her that I'd never talk about him again. And I never did. So again, that's silence, that's crystallizing that pain. And he thinks he put it away in a brick box, but it's still in the mind. I remember taking the word father and putting it in a little brick box in the back of my mind until now. And so this is why I said before, he did a lot of the work, even though many may not see it as such, because until, according to him, the writing of this book, until the revisiting of these memories, these things were locked away, but these things were subconsciously governing his behavioral patterns. And I believe we spoke about behavioral patterns before. Now, this is the dichotomous thought, okay? Sunday morning, this is a quote. My belief in God has been with me since I was a little boy, and I still believe in God now. He says, I believe in grace and the mercy of G. That belief got seated in me when I was just a kid. No matter how many other crazy things jumped off in my life, God was always there. My mother made sure of that. And so there's this anchoring in biblical principles, while the wild winds of these traumas try to pull him away from that. And this is kind of what we witnessed between you believe you could fly to feeling on a person's booty. This is the battle, right? So this, again, as I always shared before, is his mother and him. And this is, he's quoting, let me read his mother first. My mother wasn't perfect. She had her bad habits. Above all, mom was a praying woman who looked to God for a better way. She was a loving woman who protected her 4 children with the strength of a lioness. And this is, again, him covering, as many would want to, for their parent, especially in his case, the only parent that he really knew. I wanted to do more homework, he says, and get all A's. I wanted to prove myself and make my mother proud. But every time I made up my mind to conquer the problem and start reading, every time I opened a book, my mind would turn off. So I put those side by side. Those are quotations out the book of him struggling with not understanding the quote problem and what was wrong with him, and why no amount of desire could allow him to read and grasp and comprehend like the other children. And at the other side, he's saying his mother wasn't perfect. And again, I find it interesting that he keeps mentioning these bad habits, but then again mentioning, as I said before, this Sunday morning type thought. So we see that present in him, and we see that present in his mother. Now, abandonment issues concerning the whole call me daddy. Abandonment fear often stems from childhood loss. This loss could be related to a traumatic event, such as the loss of a parent through death or divorce, or never knowing the parent, right? It can also come from not getting enough physical, emotional care. These early childhood experiences can lead to a fear of being abandoned by others later in life, which many say he does live in fear, and this contributes to his controlling nature, okay? Because he does have abandonment issues. When he was curious, he said he wasn't upset, he was hurt. And when he wanted to explore that hurt, he did not have emotional support to explore that hurt because his mother seemed to be also hurt. And so he was silenced in that space. And this is what you see in many spaces he does to those who he encounters, is that he attempts to silence them. And that's just a repeat of what was done to him. Okay. Now I got a little something more for you concerning some of the profile of his mother and possibly what could again contribute to the possibility of him uh, having been injured in vitro, okay, while in the womb. According to his song, Heaven, I Need a Hug, his mother was 45 when she died in 1993. Born in 1967, Kelly would have been around 26 years old. Follow me a little bit. According to the dates given and birth order, these details will make Joanne Kelly a teenage mother. I thought this was interesting. Okay. And now I'm going to have to go get some water, y'all, before I read on. Hold on one second. All right, y'all. Sorry about that. I needed some water. All right. So Joanne Kelly would have been around 23 years old when Carrie Kelly, this is some Inspector Gadget type stuff, y'all. And this is only just to, not to shame her in any way, because most I rest her soul, she passed on. But it's to build a profile of what could have possibly been happening that contributed to the environment in which he was born, okay? Joanne Kelly would have been around 23 when Carrie Kelly was born, which is R. Kelly's youngest brother. He's the baby of the four. She would have been around 19 years old when Robert was born, 17 when his brother Bruce was born, and 15 when the older sister Teresa was born. So this is roundabout because I don't know her day of birth, but based on the numbers that was given in the song, Heaven, I Need a Hug, he said his mother was 45. And so working backwards with a little bit of math, if she passed in 93, so you have, depending on her age or where her birthday falls, you're looking at 1918, 1716, thereabout, or 2019, and thereabout, like depending, because he's born in the beginning of the year. So unless her birthday is in the beginning of the year, right, at the time that she passes, he's 26 years old. Okay, so around 2017 when his brother Bruce was born, and 15 when the older sister Teresa was born. So she would have been, if this number is correct, and if the number of 45 is accurate in Heaven, I Need a Hug, then she was a teenage mother 3 times. He was the third of these teenage pregnancies, and that could contribute to the level of anger and indifference that she felt because his father left, leaving her now with a pregnancy, and he would have had to have known that she had 2 other children. Okay. So how stressful could this situation have been? These are all just questions. Speaking of the poverty, he says, we moved around a lot when I was young. We lived in a housing project on 63rd Street on the south side before moving to a small place on 107th and Parnell. Back then, the projects didn't seem as bad as people make them out to be today. My family knew everybody in the neighborhood, and everybody in the neighborhood knew my family. So they were poor, like many were during this time. He was living in the projects at one time, and they moved around a lot. By the time they were in high school, nothing much had changed in this respect, because his music teacher, Mrs. McLean, says concerning his childhood home, it was bare, one table, two chairs. There was no father there, and I knew that, and they had very little. So by the time he's 15, 16 in high school, it's still the same case. So when his brother Kerry says that he was concerned about letting his mother know what was happening to him because his mother had to go to work and she was in school, and that their sister, who was the perpetrator, was the only one that she had to watch them. The concern was they already lacked. And they were not, if they did not have somebody to look after them, and at that time they were young, then what would become of them, right? So this fear of stability, this fear of a home, all of these things made them, or Kerry in that situation, put, addressing the issue on the back burner, okay? So this again is another quote. The reason I love my mother so much is she was not perfect and she never claimed to be. So again, he's highlighting the imperfection of his mother. But I loved her because she was my mother. So the question is, he's saying this, but is there a possibility that he didn't, that he had some resentment towards his mother? I don't know. He says he was a mama's boy. There are other people who said he was a mama's boy, but his brother also testifies, Kerry, that says when he came along, they didn't have the best of relationship because Kerry kind of unseated Robert as the mama's boy, okay? She had her bad habits. She loved her Winston cigarettes and her Miller Beer. We read that before. Sometimes she drank too much and get sick. Again, when you drink too much and get sick, and this is something that's on an ongoing basis, you have an alcohol problem to a certain degree. My mother wasn't ashamed to talk about her imperfections. She discussed her faults, telling me how she wanted to stop drinking and smoking like she did. Okay? And again, these are the Winstons and the Miller Lite. Okay, and I read this before, so I'll put it on the screen and you can just pause it and read it because my voice is going down. But again, this is him identifying again that his mother was drinking. We just identified there's a possibility, if the numbers are correct, that his mother was a teenage mother more than once, more than twice, and he would have made the third time going into her early 20s. So before the age of 25, she would have had 4 children. They had different fathers, but she did raise them to look out for each other, and that the mother, she was the collective bond between them. And he noticed that his father wasn't around and uh, was silenced on the matter. So he wasn't able to get any resolve on that matter. And he internalized the hate that his mother had for the situation. He internalized that as well. Okay, so it's needless to say that his mother struggled in more ways than one, of which he enumerated more times than one, right? And again, I read this before, so you can definitely read it at your own discretion. This is one of the struggles of her not wanting to smoke anymore. And shortly after that proclamation, she resorts to smoking because it was difficult to kick that habit, okay? So this was the church situation. So you can just pause the screen and take a minute to read it. And then I'm going to go on. Again, this is me recounting the facts about the hidden disability. Now it's no longer possibly hidden. If this is the issue, fetal alcohol syndrome is widely understood to be a hidden disability. Although it has been over 40 years since the harmful effects of fetal alcohol syndrome were identified in medical literature, the majority of individuals with fetal alcohol syndrome of any age, so even if you're 52, 53, 60, they're not properly diagnosed, again, because this is something that's not necessarily to the forefront, and something that people, even the medical profession, are not in agreement with. Some may say you can drink a little bit of wine, it won't hurt, and some say you can't. So there's no consensus necessarily in the medical profession, and this is something that needs a spotlight on it. Even if this is not his case, it still needs a spotlight on it. People with fetal alcohol syndrome may struggle to socialize with others their own age. It may be difficult for them to realize that a person might pretend to be their friend in order to take advantage of the individual with them. He's on record, and others are on record, as saying that because he had a talent, many were willing to explore that talent. Many saw him as an opportunity to push in order to get into the limelight. And again, his mother said, "You're going to be famous." So there are many people. This is not something that he testified to, saying, "I always wanted to be a famous singer." It's kind of like, "I guess so." He says in his book that his music teacher says, "You're going to have to give up basketball," which was his love. And because I want to train you, because this is what you're going to be. You're going to be famous in this area. So is there a bit of resentment that came along with that? I don't know. This can have serious psychological, criminal, and financial consequences. It is important that people with fetal alcohol syndrome understand what is a healthy relationship. And as we can see with all of the media and all of the stories, that he does not have an understanding of what a healthy relationship is. Lying can occur when a person with fetal alcohol syndrome has poor memory and creates a story to fill in the gaps. We explored that last time. People with fetal alcohol syndrome frequently possess artistic, and we explored that, or musical talents which exceed even that of the typical person of their age. So couple that with having a talented mother, couple that with having it in your family, couple that with everyone telling you you have a talent and you're going to be famous and you have to pursue this thing, right? And he exceeds even the typical person of his age. So for a 15-year-old, for a 12-year-old, for an 18-year-old, this is what people saw in him and didn't realize that it wasn't just necessarily pure musical genius. It was a result of something else. And I was speaking earlier to my mother about this, and I was saying it's kind of akin to someone who possibly may be artistic or on the artistic spectrum, and they may have a photographic memory. And for the everyday person, you're like, wow, such and such has such an amazing memory, and the person is wild by this ability to have an amazing memory that's beyond the norm, not realizing that it's a result of something else not necessarily operating optimally. And so the people who are like, in R. Kelly's case, you're so musically talented. I don't know. I would like to hear from them if they ever considered that it was a result of something else being messed with. And in this case, it was his learning ability and his ability to comprehend words and math and things of that nature. So that was compromised, and his musical talents, abilities they were magnified. So people with fetal alcohol syndrome also talented storytellers, which he is, actors and comedians. Music can also be an outlet to release anger, revenge, or other strong emotions, which I think I looked it up again. He has like over 110 singles and I heard again, Demetrius Smith say that he doesn't communicate like everyone else does. He communicates through music. He may see something that he may not be able to express to you with words speaking necessarily, but he can write a song and communicate that for you. And so this definitely fits him. When it becomes difficult to communicate with words, a person, and again, he kind of said it word for word, with fetal alcohol syndrome can use music to express how he or she feels. Like those suffering from mental illness or traumatic brain injury, people with fetal alcohol syndrome often use music as therapy. And again, an interviewer asked Demetrius, should he get jail time or should he get therapy? And, should they stop him from writing music? And he said, in his estimation, he'll never stop from writing music. You may stop from hearing his music, but he doesn't think he will stop from writing music. And there are possibilities because music, he uses music as his therapy to get him through. And he actually said that he wrote I Believe I Can Fly for his mother, as a therapeutic moment for processing his pain and loss of his mother, which he classifies himself as a mama's boy. And so that song, he gave it to Michael Jackson, and Michael Jackson accepted it and sung it. And I'm sorry that it's late and I'm a little tired, but I wanted to get this out because I know I probably won't be back to deliver it for some time. So if anybody has any questions or comments, feel free to leave it below. Um, I know many people are like, you know, you may be onto something, and I'm in my little corner in YouTube and not necessarily coming with sensationalism or hype, but I think it will get to the right people at the right time for, because that's what we do. We build on the research of others. If it wasn't for the research of others and the information that others have brought forth, this process of just, you know, going back through the information out there would have been way more difficult. Okay. So again, I just put a quote from Judges 13:7 that talks about not drinking wine or strong drink when someone is conceiving or when someone has conceived. And this particular verse is for the Nazarite vow, but I think there is some wisdom in it, some biblical understanding in it, some, you know, things that happen to the fetus while it's in vitro when we ingest certain things and put certain things in our body. And so in the case of the Nazarite, who is supposed to retain his strength or retain his strength, the mother is advised not to do these things so that she does not pollute the child that is in the womb. So again, please note that these findings are based on public observation and deduction of information available to the public. This is not an attempt to absolve Robert Kelly of any wrongdoing, but to shed some much needed light on this very complex issue. Hours of research and years of personal training has gone into connecting these dots. You are implored to follow up, do your own research, and help this information to get into the hands of those who can benefit from it. So let me just recap. And I tell you to sip on that for a while, because again, there is still even more to come. And if you're wondering who I am, I'm Amuna Yisrael, a DIY soul improvement expert with over 20 years actively dedicated to my own journey. I coined the phrase Soulonomics, in case you're wondering about what that is. And I've written several books, one by the name Soulonomics. And I'm actively using my voice to help others on their soul journey. And this is why I find and I actually have the soulcenter.com is the link below of where you can have some courses if you want to get on the journey to finding out and working through your own issues, your own experiences, and to get to the root of the problem so that you can begin your healing process. So this website is up there as well. I've been doing this for years, so this is not new, me happening upon R. Kelly's information, but all of the things that I've been exposed to just in learning and studying, I found this case one that, you know, needed to be looked into further, and I kind of explored in areas that others are not necessarily willing to touch or desire to touch for whatever their reasons are. Just to recap concerning his mother, Joanne Kelly, and the situation that she found herself in, it would be interesting to know her situation. I know that at one point he says his grandmother is there, and he speaks about his grandmother. At one point, they're living in a 3-story flat, and his grandmother is on the top floor. And so it seems to be a strained relationship between his grandmother and his mother. I think I'll go a little bit more into that and some of the information that he leaves about his grandmother, because now that gives you a broader picture. It broadens the scope of what was going on possibly in that particular relationship and how this may be something that's intergenerational, and whether the mother goes out and conceives early and then continues to conceive, and then she's put in a compromising situation. And oftentimes when young women are, you find some type of maladaptive way to cope with the stress. And according to him, her bad habit was cigarettes and drinking. And so we know that cigarettes, when you look at what's going on with cigarettes, right? I'm going to give y'all a little Soulonomics, then I'm going to wind down. When you look at cigarettes, cigarettes is a smoking action. Okay. The organ that the cigarette affects is the lungs. When you have, when the lungs are associated, when you sigh, like usually when you do that motion, a sighing motion, the first thing someone is going to ask you is, what are you worried about? Okay. So oftentimes blowing smoke is associated with the emotion of worry and concern. Okay. That has to do with your breath. Okay. So there's a possibility that because some people, cigarettes don't do it for them, and some people, alcohol don't do it for them. But the fact that she had addiction to towards alcohol and cigarettes, in this case I'm speaking about cigarettes, that to me models or demonstrates that there was some worry and concern. And if in case, like I said, that these numbers add up, then having 3 children before the age of 20 is cause for concern. And the very fact that she wanted to go back to school and better herself shows that she wasn't necessarily content with her situation. So she herself may have been conflicted. And if this is true, that she was a teenage mother, then she was just a child herself. That's number one. Number two, when we're talking about an addiction to alcohol, and we look at alcohol and the liver has to do with a lot of emotions that get trapped in the liver, are emotions such as anger. Amuna, where are you learning all this stuff from? It's Soulonomics, y'all. Anger gets stuck in the liver in the same way fear gets stuck in the kidneys. So that's why sometimes they call it an angry drunk. And so when you see illustrations of him talking about his mother being angry and, having this type of response to him inquiring about his father, and this is just one situation, but we do see in other situations with Lucius in the book that the mother took no check, or she took no stuff from people, right? So as opposed to being maybe sad or depressed, it seems that she had a combination of worry and anger, okay? And that's just based on the two um, the two vices that she had an inclination towards, and some of the things he left on record. Okay. And so for me, it begins to add up. Hopefully, I didn't lose you along the way. I'm not going to go too much longer. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. And again, as we continue to look at this story and seek to understand, hopefully we can look in our own environments, in our own communities, and see whether or not these situations are present, and if they are, how can we speak to them, deal with them, and rectify them. So once again, it's a medical disclaimer. The content is not intended to be suitable for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or a qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. All right, everybody, thank you for tuning in. And I am going to say good night, as my voice has already said good night.